Okay. Right. Okay, thank you. Let's chant Odaimoku 3 times, please. Namu Myoho Renge Kyo. Namu Myoho Renge Kyo. Namu Myoho Renge Kyo. Thank you very much. So I'm going to talk about Nichiren Shonin and anger. Leading on from Sidamen Shonin, here's a talk about the Bodhisattva way. I'm going to talk about Nichiren Shonin, his lifelong career as a teacher of Buddhism and a teacher of the Lotus Sutra. So, as has been mentioned before this weekend, when we think of Nichiren Shonin, his character, sometimes we get this kind of cartoon image of a outrageous monk who's always angry and chastising the government and criticizing other Buddhist schools, like pitchfork Buddhism. So I want to just talk about his character, and I know you all know his life story, but just to once more revisit his life and what we can know about his character. So, if we imagine 13th century Japan, 750 years ago, on the east coast of Japan, the main island of Japan, there's a small fishing village called Kominato, and the shoreline is very rough around there, and inland it's very mountainous, lots of mountains and valleys with the pine forests covering everything. And Kominato is a small fishing village, just a community of small fishing huts, and every day people go out to catch fish or collect seaweed along the seashore. That situation, Nichiren Shonin was born. He was born as the son of a fisherman, 16th of February 1222. And at that time he was given the name Zennichi Maro, so he wasn't yet called Nichiren. That came later. So we can imagine he was born, and then as soon as he was old enough, he would help his father out on the fishing boat, go out and do chores, and try to help the family out. He was the youngest of 4 brothers, so he had the youngest of 4 sons. He had 3 older brothers. So he would have helped out on the boat, but when he was 12 years old, he went to a nearby temple called the Seichoji on Mount Kiyosumi to study. At that time, temples were not just a place of religious education, but they were centers of knowledge. So he went at 12 years old to study Buddhism and Confucianism, but also to get an education. So he went when he was 12, and he studied with the abbot of that temple called Dozenbo. And Dozenbo recognized the young boy's talent and intelligence and the characteristics, and he taught him very well. And Zennichi Maro became a lay novice, a lay student at that temple. And he studied for a few years with his teacher, but he had lots of questions. And so when he was 15 years old, he decided to take vows to become a monk. And at that time, he, as is traditional, he changed his name again. So first of all, he was born Zennichi Maro, and then he changed his name to Zeshobo Rencho. And he studied under his master in that temple. His master taught him Buddhism, Confucianism, and he studied all of the sutras which were available in that temple. It was a small temple on a mountain, but it had a good collection of different sutras. but the story tells us that the boy was very, very quick. So soon he'd read all of them. But his questions weren't answered. The more he read, the more questions he had. The more questions were unanswered. So at that time in Japan, there was lots of natural disasters occurring, and also civil unrest, and famine, pestilence. And the young boy thought, if Japan is a Buddhist country, and Buddhism is supposed to remove people's suffering, it looks like Buddhism isn't working. So why the people of Japan are suffering like that at the moment? That was his question. So he thought there must be one sutra which reflects the Buddha's true idea, because at that time in Japan, lots of different Buddhist schools all had a different sutra which they followed, which they taught, and different methods, but none of them seemed to be working. So he thought there must be one which brings all of them together, which can help people out of their suffering. So with this question in mind, he went to the main hall of the temple, and that temple had a statue. The main statue which is enshrined is a bodhisattva called Kokuzo Bodhisattva. So he went to the main hall and he expressed his wish to be able to study hard, and he asked for a blessing or some guidance from the bodhisattva to help him understand what was going wrong with Buddhism. So this is the young Rencho making his promise in front of the Kokuzo Bodhisattva. And actually he was very serious about it. He fasted for 21 days and prayed all of the 21 days. And then finally he got something, some hint. And then soon after that incident, he asked his master, okay, master, I've studied all of the sutras in this temple. I want to go to the city, to other places to learn more. And the master agreed, because he realized this boy was very capable, and the master had taught him everything that he could, but it was time for him to look to other places for more answers. So with his master's permission, he left the temple and he went first of all to Kamakura, which was the capital of Japan at that time, to study Buddhism. And he spent 15 years in total visiting temples throughout Japan of all the major schools, in Kamakura and also in Kyoto, another big city in Japan. And also he spent a long time on Mount Hiei-san, which was like a Buddhist university. It was a huge temple complex where all monks wanted to go to learn, and it held a huge stores of sutras and also many teachers of different lineages. So he went there and studied. So in total 15 years he took. And then finally in 1253 he returned back to the small temple on the top of the mountain on the coast of Japan, Seichoji, to report his findings, his conclusion, his answer, if he'd found it. So based on his studies, he concluded that it was the Lotus Sutra which truly represented the essence of Buddhism. It was the Buddha's true mind, what the Buddha really wanted to communicate. So when he returned to the mountain, he climbed up to the top of the mountain, and from the top of the mountain you can see the Pacific Ocean, on a good day, not if it's a foggy. And very early in the morning, the sun was just rising over the ocean, and he chanted Odaimoku 10 times to the rising sun as an expression of his belief that the Lotus Sutra was the teaching that had the answers and could help the people of Japan, and was the right teaching for that time period when everything was in such a state in Japan. At that time, then he became Nichiren. And Nichiren, the name comes from the Lotus Sutra. Do you know where Nichiren comes from?
Oh, yeah, that's a sun lotus.
Sun lotus, that's right. So Nichi is the character for sun, and Ren is a lotus flower. So it comes from 2 chapters in the Lotus Sutra. Nichi comes from chapter 21. So if you turn in your Lotus Sutra, it's a page 296. 296, and then the 4th paragraph down, halfway through, it says, well, the paragraph says, anyone who understands why the Buddhas expound many sutras, who knows the position of this sutra in this series of sutras, and who expounds it after my extinction according to its true meaning, will be able to eliminate the darkness of the living beings of the world where he walks about, just as the light of the sun and the moon eliminates all darkness. So that's the origin of Nichi, to eliminate the darkness and the suffering of Japan. And then Ren, the lotus, comes from chapter 15. So that is on page 239. At the top of the page. They have studied the way of bodhisattvas well. They are not defiled by worldliness, just as the lotus flower is not defiled by water. So that reflected his wish to live in society and actively engage in helping people out of their suffering, not going up and spending the rest of his life on the top of that mountain. He wanted to help people to remove their suffering, be engaged in the world. And so after that day in 1253, he made his first lecture at his home temple, and that was the beginning of his lifelong career as a teacher of the Lotus Sutra. And he travelled to major cities all the time to spread the sutra, to help people. So now, in Nichiren Shu, when somebody becomes a minister or priest, first of all, we become a novice student, and we take vows. And first of all, we take vows with our master, and then after that, all Nichiren Shu novice ministers travel to Seichoji, this same temple, to officially register the same vows in the same temple where Nichiren Shonin became a monk. So this year I went in April to do that one. And even now, in the main hall, there is this original statue of Kokuso Bodhisattva. So I was really looking forward to see that one where Nichiren Shonin made that wish, asked for guidance. And he asked to become the wisest man in Japan. That was his wish. So I thought, okay, I really want to go there and make the same wish. So I'd kind of practiced it in my head, and I was going to do this thing. And I got there, and I realized, thinking about Nichiren Shonin's life, he was able to make that wish to become the wisest man in Japan because that wish was based on a foundation of compassion. The reason why he wanted to become the wisest man in Japan was so that he can help people remove their suffering. So on first hearing, it sounds pretty egotistical. Oh, I want to become the wisest man in Japan. But that was not his idea. It was based on compassion and the way of the Bodhisattva. So I thought, oh, okay, I'm immature. I will not take the same way to vow to become the wisest man in Japan, because my compassion is not enough. So I thought, okay, I'll change. I made a vow to become the most compassionate person first. That is the first step before wisdom. So most compassionate person. That is a priority. So during his teaching career, Nichiren Shonin underwent many attacks and persecutions. He had to suffer criticism and insult. He was ridiculed, threatened, physically attacked more than once, and exiled by the government, and attempts made on his life, false accusations made against him. So in one of his letters he describes what he had to go through in 27 years since he first started teaching. He said, in these 27 years I was exiled once to Ito of Izu Peninsula on May the 12th, 1261. I was wounded on the head, and my left hand was broken when tortured on November 11th in the first year of Bunnei 1264. On September, in the 8th year of Bunnei, I was exiled to Sado and was almost beheaded at Tatsunokuchi. Besides these incidents, I encountered numerous persecutions. My disciples were murdered, injured, exiled, and penalized. It is uncertain if my suffering was as bad as that of the Buddha Shakyamuni or even worse. So when I read that, I thought, how did he persevere through all of those events through his life? And also, how did he continue and never respond with anger? So I don't know for sure if he ever felt angry. I think he probably did. But he never showed that anger or responded with anger. In several of his letters, he always cautions his disciples and followers. You must respond properly with proper behavior and not get carried away. Be polite. Don't insult others. And don't respond to their unjust accusations with anger. So he has a reputation as being fierce and aggressive, antagonistic and angry, but actually his intention was always very clear, to help people. And from that intention he started teaching. So in some of his letters, I'm sure maybe you've read some of his letters, he speaks quite harshly about other Buddhist schools or towards the government. He uses very strong language. So I think earlier, Siedemann Sensei, he was mentioning lay people may take up arms to defend the Dharma, the teaching of Buddhism, which Nichiren Shonin quoted. And he also said in one letter, some temples should be burned to the ground. He was quite a character. But do you think he really meant to burn down temples of other schools? Actually, the temples which he was talking about were never burned down. So his followers certainly never acted on those letters. He was using extremely strong language because his own hut had been burned down in Matsubagayatsu. This picture up here, his own hermitage where he lived was burned down, attacked, and he barely escaped with his life. So he was saying, this has happened to me, but look at you. You should suffer. You should not suffer the consequences of karma, but you should take a look at yourself, what you're doing. So it's to try to get them to awaken to their behavior. So on the one hand, we have that idea of Nichiren Shonin, extremely strong, harsh language. But he was not a square person, not just one way. So I love, Sensei always mentions this writing of Nichiren Shonin's. There was one old lady who had practiced chanting in Nembutsu, chanting for Amitabha Buddha, for her whole life. But towards the end of her life, she heard Nichiren Shonin's teaching and started chanting Namu Myoho Renge Kyo. And she wrote him a letter, and she said, "Oh, I want to practice the Lotus Sutra and chant Odaimoku, but is it okay also to chant Nembutsu, chant for the Amida Buddha?" And you know what he said? First, chant as much Odaimoku as you can, and chant the Lotus Sutra as much as you can. And then after that, you can chant Nembutsu for Amida Buddha. Sounds like a completely different person. Completely different. This is the same person who said Zen is a devil, practicing a Pure Land leads to hell, Shingon will destroy the nation, Ritsu is a traitor to Japan. These are 4 different Buddhist schools. So on the one hand, he said those things, and then to this lady, he was saying, okay, first the Lotus Sutra or Daimoku, and then you can chant for birth in the Pure Land. So because he understood people, and she practiced that practice her whole life, she was very attached to it. So main point was that now she had Odaimoku and Lotus Sutra. So he wasn't completely just flat out one way. So in Buddhism, there are 2 ways to teach. One is called shoju, and one is called shakubuku. I don't know if you've heard these words. So it's 2 ways to teach Buddhism. Shoju, the first one, means leading and convincing people by respecting their viewpoints, even though they may be incorrect, and helping them come to an understanding without compromising the truth. And on the other hand, shakubuku is a more direct way to directly address their wrong views, a wrong understanding. So 2 ways. In fact, shakubuku, the translation is normally translated break and subdue. You can imagine Nichiren Shonin talking about the Shingon and Ritsu, the devil and hell.